back. So enough, anyways. I know we're all at COP and it's a little hard to hear, but welcome. We are so delighted to host an all-women panel. Woo! Yep. Woohoo! And today we'd like to talk about raising coral reefs to the top of the agenda for climate adaptation here at COP. So we are here to talk about a roadmap for resilient coral reefs and coastal communities, that critical interconnection. I hope you've all been able to visit with some of the quotes around the room. These are voices from communities on the front lines, and we are so excited to have all of our speakers here today to elevate those voices. So let me just briefly introduce our very esteemed panel. These will be our speakers today. We will each be speaking to a quote that resonated with us and what that means for our climate and coral reefs agenda today. I'd first like to give the floor to Assistant Secretary Monica Medina. And Monica, we're so delighted you could join us. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And are we going to introduce everybody, or should I just dive in?
Let's just dive in.
All
just
right.
like a coral reef, we'll just dive in. And we'll introduce ourselves as we go. So.
Okay. I'm Monica Medina. I'm the Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans, Environment, and Science, and I love that oceans is in my title. It's one of the best things about my job. I also am now the Special Envoy for biodiversity and water resources, which gives me a chance to work on coral reef issues. And just one last plug for the U.S. and its commitment to coral reefs. We are also the chair of the International Coral Reef Initiative this year. It's an international initiative of countries dedicated to conserving coral reefs, and we rotate the chairmanship, and we're very pleased to have been the chair this past year, and it's been a very exciting thing for us to get to lead on coral reefs again. My favorite quote, I guess, is one from Sylvia Earle, which is that when you know, you can make change. What we didn't know before, we couldn't change, but what we know now, we know we need to change. And we know we need to change because we know coral reefs are at the front line, if you will, of the environmental risk of climate change. We know that even at 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, coral reefs are incredibly vulnerable, which is why it's so important that this topic be discussed today. So think about it. I mean, it's coral reefs. What is more beautiful? Can anyone think of anything in nature more beautiful than a vibrant coral reef? Colorful, diversity of coral, fish everywhere. You can even hear them chomping on the coral. And what's more important than restoring them? And I'm going to give a shout out again to Coral Vita, one of the great companies in the U.S., and Sam, who does great work restoring coral reefs. It's so very important. And we know they're beautiful. We know we want to restore them just for their beauty and just the wonder of nature that they represent. But they're also so important for livelihoods and for they feed people. They are a key source of food supply in so many parts of the world. They're also critical for climate change, as everyone knows. They are one of our key weapons for adaptation and resilience. They're one of the key ways that we can fight climate change is to have vibrant coral reefs. They protect us from storms and prevent flooding and reduce damage, and they're the cheapest kind of adaptation out there. They are so perfectly adapted. They are so perfectly made for the job of adaptation and resilience. It's just a natural, right? It should be second nature that we should be pumping money into conserving coral reefs right now. They have the potential to store carbon emissions as well, and even though they only occupy about 2% of our ocean, coastal blue ecosystems like seagrass and mangroves account for about half of the carbon sequestered in ocean sediments. And at the same time, well, let's stop there. Half of the sediment that holds carbon is in these precious areas, and if we're going to get more funding, more investment in oceans, it's in places like this where we know carbon is effectively stored and where we can measure it and where we can make sure that those investments pay off in terms of that carbon storage. We also know that they're being stressed like never before. Climate change is causing our ocean to become warmer, higher sea levels, and more acidic and less productive. And we've all been in one of those reefs that doesn't look so good. And you just think, oh no, what are we doing to the planet? And you don't have to be a diver. You can see it when you're snorkeling in the places where we ourselves are hammering our coral reefs, whether it's through overfishing or runoff or climate change. We know that we need to do something, and fast. We know we need to work on this problem right now. And so that's why we in the Biden administration are so keenly trained on adaptation and resilience. This is a COP about implementation, kind of a buzzword that really encaptures adaptation and resilience. And we at the Biden administration know that climate change particularly burdens those communities that live near coral reefs. And there are 500 million people who depend on small-scale fisheries that are based in local communities near coral reefs and near coastal areas. So to preserve the coastal ecosystems for communities and the people who depend on them, we knew we had to step up. And that's why we've created something called the Ocean Conservation Pledge. We are hoping to convince countries all around the world, coastal countries, to pledge to protect 30% of their coastal waters by 2030 for the benefit of coral reefs, mangroves, communities that depend on them, and for that resilience and adaptation benefit. This is a really important pledge. We've lined up a few countries, and we hope to line up more. So if you are around someone from a government, your government, please ask them to sign our pledge. We are hoping that this will also buoy the efforts of the 30 by 30 global biodiversity framework that the second COP this month will be working towards in Montreal, the Global Biodiversity COP, the CBD. And so maybe some of you will be there. I'll see you in a very colder, different climate. We are thrilled to be trying to rally the world around this kind of coastal ocean protection. And we want particularly to talk about another program that we are doing in the U.S. It's called Prepare. It's an emergency plan for adaptation and resilience. And we have brought hundreds of millions of dollars to the table to help with Prepare. Over time, we'll have, I think, billions to pledge and Prepare to hopefully bring to communities all around the world who we know need this kind of funding. We know that it's only just at the beginning stages of investment. And so we were very pleased in September of this year to roll out our Prepare Act. Outlines how 19 federal agencies, that's 19, it's a whole of government effort, will help more than 500 million people in the developing world to adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change by 2030. So we are here to tell the world that we are all in when it comes to adaptation and resilience, and we're all in when it comes to conserving precious coral reef environments, precious coral reef communities. And I'll end with a real story of hope that there are two places where I've been particularly hopeful when it comes to coral reefs. One of them is right here. I've learned a lot this week while I've been here about the Red Sea's amazingly resilient corals that are much more adapted to warm, acidic, salty seas than they are in other parts of the world. If we can learn why and how these coral adapt, we can grow these kinds of corals and others like it all around the world. And I'll tell you, I have seen it happen, which seems sort of miraculous, but I've been to a lab in Hawaii where they're growing coral and testing how they become more adapted to climate change. And you can go from tank to tank to tank where you see tiny little specks that they've taken and grown, and little by little they're growing them in these controlled environments to see what the actual impact is of local corals on with a higher acidity, higher salt in the water, more carbon in the water. Which ones grow, which ones don't, why, how does it make them grow more slowly? How can we plant them in, they have a koi pond that they then take them and transplant them. It's wonderful to see because it reminds you of why nature-based solutions, why adaptation, why resilience is so important, because nature is naturally resilient. If you give it a chance, it will come back. And I think that's the message I always take away when I get sort of down about the work. I jump in the water like I hope I get to do tomorrow. I go visit corals. I go see how the ocean is doing wherever I am. And I hope that through all our collective action, when you look around a place this big and you see this many people who care about the planet and want to see us take on this climate challenge and find ways to adapt and be as resilient as coral reefs and other parts of nature can be when faced with these kinds of changes and stresses. So if anything, I get more and more optimistic as I see the great work of all the people who are working in this space. And I hope that we all continue that, take that away from here, and that we work even closer together. We find new partnerships, new ways of working together to save coral reefs. And we're looking forward to doing more of that in ICRI and in all other sorts of collective ways, whether it's through cooperative marine protected areas, through controlling fishing, and through science and research that can really provide the breakthroughs that we need. So thank you very much, everyone. We're pleased to be here as the United States, and pleased that you all, and the wonderful sponsors of this panel, I should have mentioned them. I love working with all of them. They're great champions of coral reefs and of the ocean in general. So thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of the panel. I'm sorry I have to slip away. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Assistant Secretary. We are so honored for your opening remarks, and we really do hope you get in the water tomorrow. So, all right, moving on. So next, I would love to turn over the microphone to our colleagues from Rare Conservation, Rare Conservation, who is Rocky Sanchez Tirona. She is the managing director at Fish Forever and a very new and dear friend this week. So talk about the new partnerships at COP, as well as Mayor Mary Jean Tay of the Municipality of Libertad in the Philippines. And I will turn it over to both of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. So here, I'm here with Mayor Jean Tay. We are both from the Philippines, and we wanted to share, a story of hope. This is really, I think, one of the ways that we can really demonstrate how communities can help their coral reefs recover. We are responding to the quote here above. This is Henry, who is a former dynamite fisher in the Philippines. He used to be part of the problem, but is now a member of the Bantay Dagat, or the Guardians of the Sea, and is now a fish warden and is now part of the solution. And we see many stories of this kind of transformation. This is really the heart of the work that we do. We believe that if we are able to help communities, fishers, see that their lives and their livelihoods and their food security are all tied to the ocean and to the coral reefs and the mangroves and the seagrass habitats around them, then they are actually convinced that they really have incentives to protect and manage their resources. So we work in a program called Fish Forever. And here what we do is we help communities establish marine protected areas or no-take zones where the coral reefs can recover. And then at the same time, we allocate rights. We help the community decide which areas they're going to fish in and agree on the rules that they're going to have about how they're going to fish in the areas around this. That combination, I think, is very powerful because they know that their own actions actually result in the benefits that they will get for themselves and for their families in the future. So that's a pretty powerful package of incentives. And I think I'd like to turn over to Mayor Te, who can actually describe how this process has worked out in her municipality in Libertad in Antique. She started, this is her second round of terms, and in her first term in the 1990s, she actually helped establish marine protected areas in her community.
Thank you, Rocky. Thank you, Emily. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mayor Mary Jean from the Philippines, coming from a very small artisanal community. And actually, this is my first COP. And representing the voice of Coastal 500, a global network of mayors who we form ourselves to really help one another and make a stand, make a voice for the protection and management of our ocean. There's just about 50 mayors in the Philippines right now who's joining, and we need more. I just wanted to be here because I wanted to share my little story, probably to just inspire some of you here, because I know when we first started Coastal Resource Management Program back in 1996, which is about 26 years ago, where climate change, it was just a concept, right? 1996. We don't even know what's climate change then. We already started that. And we continuously doing it until we were able to get partnership with DARE, 2014, where we start doing the behavioral change of our people. We started from the bottom. And the secret of a very effective governance is there are only two. One, strong political will of the leaders and people's participation. You have to make sure that people are involved in all the stages of the whatever programs you're introducing, from the consultation to the planning to the implementation and to the sustainability. And in my little town, we were able to, there's a reach to reef protection. We're able to declare 40% of our forest to be under protected area. While we have a vast marine protected areas, around 8 marine protected in the area, it made us all more conscious of the burden of really joining each other to take the call of really doing it now. That's why my favorite call is, let's take the call, contribute, help one another to make sure that what we're doing now is not only for this generation, but for the generation yet unborn. So I am just so happy that I was invited by Emily as well. But of course, Rare, Brent is here. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so thankful with Rare because I got this opportunity to have a voice. While we have the Secretary of the U.S., I am also speaking on behalf of the small communities down the line, where we do the dirty work. We do all the work for us to be able to achieve our target for the generations to come. Thank you.
I'd like to, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to show a little bit of this examples of what that really looked like in Libertad. So if you could please click through. Okay, this is actually what, after that community consultation process that Mayor Ted described, the community agreed to designate those red lines as the no-take areas. And then these other areas are the managed access areas. So in these areas, they've agreed to restrict the kinds of gear that fishers use. They took away beach signs, which are destructive to corals. And they actually also managed to move the commercial fishers out of this marine, out of this these municipal waters. So those are the kinds of actions that they took. And then they also took in data from climate change vulnerability assessments and actually agreed on very specific actions that the management body of these areas would do to really help make the coral reefs and the resources more resilient. So things like restricting the fishing of herbivores that are important for coral reefs. These are things that the community learned about and understood why this is important, and that's why they've proceeded to move forward. And then lastly, because it's really hard to do this for people who are affected by, it's their livelihoods that are being affected. So definitely a lot of behavior change strategies and communications is needed to really help people understand why this is important. And then we've also included financial inclusion strategies so that there's a little bit of a cushion for the crisis and shocks that people go through. So they have savings clubs. Mayor Tess municipality has 62 savings clubs that have actually saved over almost $500,000 in total, and this is what people go to when the fishing is bad, when the weather is bad, and it makes them less desperate. So that's actually what enables them to pursue this. So with that, I think we'd love to kind of share with you a little video from a fisher that actually, so that we bring somebody from the community here.
Okay, we're gonna fingers crossed on the sound. So we might need some.
But there are subtitles. So.
Oh, you're set.
Program offshore da kag ang nearshore daw tama gid ka mayad para sa amon nga manong pangisda ay nagduro ang amon nga beul. Pagkatapos ang marine protected area natin kundiin ang mga isda nagapangitlog kag nagapahuway, obserbahan ko nga ang isda gali nga kun hindi nimo pag ang isang kalugar nga hindi nimo pag tublagan permi ang isda nagaduro kag hindi man gali kuon nga matinir ang isda gaspill out man sanda, after that balik roman mangitlog sanda mapahuway sa sanctuary.
My town actually is known to have, the area is called Tuna Highway. So we have a lot of tunas in the area. So we declare open and closed season for us to be able to have sustainable resources in the area. And here's my barangay pharmacy, right? So they guard the oceans for us. And one important thing that matters, especially on the policies that we're doing in the local, is people try to own it. I mean, all this, people had been part of all our actions. We involve each and everyone, all sectors, for us to be able to guarantee a 100% compliance and, of course, a very effective and efficient implementation.
So thank you for listening. That's a little story from Libertad in Antique.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rocky and Mayor Tay. Next, I'd like to pass it over to Shanique Albury-Smith, who is with us from the Nature Conservancy Caribbean. Over to you, Shanique.
Yes, thank you, Emily, and to the organizers for having me here this afternoon or this evening. It's a pleasure. As she mentioned, I'm Shanique Smith. I am the Deputy Director for the Caribbean Division of TNC. And we work in the insular Caribbean from the Bahamas going as far south as Barbados. And the work that we do focuses on sustainable fisheries. We look at coral restoration and conservation, as well as looking at the use of nature-based solutions for coastal resilience and adaptation. And of course, we do a lot of work with protected areas. Everybody knows, TNC knows, we always are involved with protected areas. Our work focusing on marine protected areas. So when I discussed this panel with Emily, and we were talking through topics related to fisheries and resilience, corals, and coastal adaptation, one thing that we talked about was just representing the people on the ground. And unlike the two ladies who spoke before, I work for an NGO that's somewhat in the middle. I'm not government, and I'm not quite the local community on the ground. So we're in between. Sometimes a broker between the two groups, and oftentimes we're trying to engage these groups directly. And so we chatted about, like, in forums like this, where there's challenges with access for local communities, local groups to be able to come and directly represent themselves. What are things that can be done to elevate the voices of people from the areas that we're working in the local community, to ensure that we're not just talking to ourselves, but we're also trying to represent them when they cannot represent themselves. And so I had a video that I don't think we're going to be able to show this afternoon. I wanted to just give an example of TNC's work in Jamaica, working on the Pedro Banks, where we have looked at an important and critical part of any kind of successful work for adaptation, coastal resilience, corals, and fisheries is really going to be about engagement of the community, equitable engagement, and not just engaging them to get their feedback and support, but also empowering them to be the leaders and the ones who really champion the management, conservation, and protection of their areas. And so this is why I chose the quote that was up earlier that came from a fisherwoman from Brazil. And her quote says, "The fishermen and fisherwomen are the guardians responsible for protecting our heritage." And that resonates with me. I'm from the Bahamas. I didn't say that earlier. And, I grew up in a community where you're dealing with fishers. I had an uncle who was a fisherman. And so really having the community be leaders and owning protection of the marine resources is going to be critical, not just the NGOs and the government agencies and whoever else coming along. If we don't get that kind of engagement and that buy-in and empower them to do that, we will struggle. And so since we don't have a video, right?
No,
Okay,
unfortunately
no
we
problem.
don't, but we do have a QR code. So
Yes.
I'm hoping you'll all take out your cameras now and scan the QR code for future viewing. It's a beautiful documentary about the Jamaica's first female warden. So I see some cameras out. Great work, everyone.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to share this story about a lady by the name of Cordella in Jamaica. And so 120 miles from Kingston and 50 miles offshore from the mainland of Jamaica lies 3 remote keys of Pedro Bank. The keys have no food, water, or sanitation. But like many of the nearly 600 fishers who make the journey to the key, Cordella Harvey, a 34-year-old single mother, was living in poverty and left behind the mainland in 2013 for hopes of a better life. She quickly taught herself how to fish and became integrated into this fishing community. Okay? 4 years later, in 2017, under a program called the Caribbean Marine Biodiversity Program, funded by USAID, Harvey was given the opportunity to change her life. She was chosen to become the first female fisheries warden for Pedro Bank, where she was responsible for the conservation and management of wildlife and enforcing the laws of the fish sanctuary. She joined an all-male team selected from the community that lived in this remote area to protect one of Jamaica's most important fishing areas. Okay? Although the Pedro Bank Sanctuary was declared in 2012 by the Jamaican government, its remoteness and the extreme difficulty of getting to the area meant that it was left unmanaged or attended by the government. Okay? So it was critical in our project to actually engage the community and even get persons from that community to be the ones who would take care of trying to police and manage this marine protected area. Okay, and this is a quote from Sedelia. She says, "If we didn't have the sanctuary, most of the fish population would die out. I tell my children, I take care of the birds, the turtles, and the sanctuary to make sure that in their lifetime, if they should decide to fish, they will have fish left for them." Okay? So this is just an example of not just engaging, but empowering the community. And I want to just share another quote from this young lady that kind of sums up why I think this is such a powerful story. My life has changed since I've become a warden. I feel more empowered as a woman. People have more respect for me. My kids are proud of me, and I am proud of myself. So for me, that sums it all up. Local communities will become guardians of our natural resources and the natural heritage when they are engaged, and this engagement allows them to make tangible change, not only for themselves, but for the communities that they exist in. And so I think this, my message here, just trying to be that in between, is I think we do have to continue to engage, but not just engage in the ways we have in the past. We're looking to tie conservation with economic empowerment, and as well as just improving the lives of people. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanique, for that powerful message. And I am so glad you can also hear Jamaica's first female warden's powerful message as well, noting the QR code up there again for you. So next up, we are hoping for a video message from Dr. Enrique Sala from National Geographic's Pristine Seas Expeditions. And we have a few ways we can try this, so we appreciate your willingness to bear with us. All right, step one, check.
Coral reefs are a victim of global warming, but we know we can bring them back. Communities and governments all around the world are increasing their efforts to protect coral reefs from extractive and damaging activities. And we know, I have seen it with my own eyes, when we protect a place, marine life comes back spectacularly. Fish spill over and help to replenish the areas around, improving food security and local livelihoods. But also, recently in the Line Islands and Kiribati, we have witnessed entire coral reefs coming back, bouncing back after a massive die-off after the 2015 El Nino event. If you watch our Super Reefs video on the National Geographic YouTube channel, you will see firsthand why and how we can bring coral reefs back and make them resilient in the face of global warming. That's what gives me hope.
Unfortunately for us, Dr. Enrique Sala is not here with us today. Fortunately for him, though, I believe him and his team are underwater documenting this type of recovery on coral reefs around the world. Again, I'd love to direct you to this QR code. This is a really exciting 10-minute video of remarkable coral reef recovery in the remote Line Islands in the Pacific. And during the break between sessions, we'll try to pull up both of our videos on YouTube. But we've got the QR code as we adapt and manage not only to the climate crisis, but also to some technology. All right, so I think you're stuck with me now for a little bit. My name is Emily Darling. I'm the Director of Coral Reef Conservation at the Wildlife Conservation Society. I have one of the most remarkable jobs where I am trained as a coral reef field biologist, so I'm happiest with a scuba tank on my back, looking at the health and history of coral reefs around the world. I am also exceptionally privileged to bring stories from the 16 countries that WCS works in on coral reef conservation and look at this critical intersection between coral reefs and people. So today, I have chosen this quote from Mzungu in Wasini Island in the south of Kenya, right on the border with Tanzania. She says, "With the money I earn from the sea, I buy food and clothes for my children. I wish I could use it for other things, but for now, that's all I can afford." This quote from Mzungu to me is powerful, and it reminds me of a time in Fiji when I was honored to join a community fish harvest. On Koro Island in Fiji, our WCS team was sworn in by candlelight to become members of Nakondo village. With a gift of a sperm whale's tooth, we shared in our blessings with the chief for a productive and safe harvest. Soon thereafter, over 100 village members, including us now after the ceremony, swam out to the coral reef. Lassoed around the reef was a 1 kilometer long vine as thick as my arm, and that demarcated the areas of a traditional tambu that the community had set aside for fish to recover until this day of the harvest. The villagers and our community members were dressed in flip-flops and shorts and homemade goggles, so I felt horribly overdressed in a wetsuit and fins. But working together in this traditional harvest, we caught over 1,000 coral reef fish that day. And in fact, I'm happy to tell you that it was actually 1,031 fish to be precise. Our WCS team stayed up late into the night with community members, and by head torch, we identified each species of reef fish and its size and counted it. When we were done, the elder women of the village then pushed us aside and came into this pile of fish in the middle of a field, and they sat down and started making small piles, one for each family in the village, piles for the neighboring villages, and ultimately they sold the majority of fish.
Coral reefs are a victim of global warming, but we know we can bring them back.
One
Communities and governments all around the world are increasing their efforts to protect coral reefs from extractive and damaging activities. And we know, I have seen it with my own eyes, when we protect a place, marine life comes back spectacularly.
Enrique was really
Fish
excited to
spill
tell
over
you this
and
one
help
more
to
time.
replenish the areas around, improving food security in local livelihoods. But also, recently in the Line Islands in Kiribati, we have witnessed entire coral reefs.
Well, that killed my dramatic narrative, but we'll build back to it. Okay. So I wanted to tell you about that after this is late at night in the fish harvest, and the whole point of this was that the majority of fish were sold, and so that year the village had enough cash to send all of their children off island to school. And this story and all of the stories we've heard today reflects the intricate, long-held relationships between coral reefs, local communities, and indigenous peoples that we all know so well here. These relationships, of course, exist around the world, from Kenya to Fiji and to the 117 countries that host coral reef habitat. Coral reefs support nearly 1 billion people with food security, nutrition, livelihoods, and coastal protection, and yet scientists estimate that 50% of the world's coral reefs have been lost in the last 40 years, mostly due to climate change as well as other local human pressures. And what's scary is that only 1 in 10 corals are expected to survive our current future climate trajectory. And so we have no choice but to take radical action on global emissions, which is why I know we are all here today. So what do we stand to lose? Well, without coral reefs, 97% of the shoreline protection that they provide will be lost. Communities will be more vulnerable to devastating storms, floods, and sea level rise. Without coral reefs, economic losses are valued at $9.9 trillion annually. And without coral reefs, families like Mzungu will have a harder time feeding their children, and families like those on Coral Island will have a harder time managing their traditional fisheries so that their children can go to school. But of course, there is hope, and despite these bleak statistics, we have just heard some of the science from Enrique that coral reefs can recover. Enrique and his team have shown us what's possible for natural recovery from climate change on remote reefs. But of course, remote reefs without people are uncommon, and the majority of coral reefs have people. And so what can we do to help coral reefs and people recover from the impacts of climate change and build adaptation? So today, WCS is announcing a 5-point call to action for national governments to include coral reefs in national adaptation planning and financing. The 5 steps of our strategy is first, to simply protect and restore coral reefs as a climate adaptation strategy. Coral reefs reduce 97% of the wave energy, as we've heard, and resilient coral reefs can protect resilient coastlines. Second, from all of the stories we have heard today, we know that conservation must benefit communities. Too often, we think of conservation only as a national park, but we must not only ensure community management, but also mainstream conservation into critical sectors like food, finance, and health. This will ensure better outcomes for coral reefs and people. Reducing pollution is a no-brainer. Pollution from sewage, sediment, and fertilizers is the #1 local threat to coral reefs worldwide. It's also a threat for people. Waterborne diseases cause 1.4 million deaths every year and an estimated loss of US $12 billion in economic losses. Healthier people and healthier reefs will fare better in climate change, and they need clean water. Fourth, rebuilding community fisheries. As we've heard from Rocky, Mayor Tay, and Shanique, coral reef fish and fishers and the wardens who protect those resources protect a critical source of delivery of micronutrients and livelihoods to an estimated 500 million people around the world. From the Philippines to Kenya, from Cuba to the Solomon Islands, careful management closely with traditional owners and local fishers can be used to rebuild fisheries appropriate to local places. And lastly, as a scientist, I would love to make a plug that we have to measure our progress using data-driven metrics. The International Coral Reef Initiative, as Assistant Secretary Medina mentioned, has recommended critical indicators for coral reefs to be adopted next month in Montreal at the CBD COP, the Convention for Biological Diversity. This means that this is a way that scientists like me can join together and help monitor the world's coral reefs. So we call on all national governments to support these recommendations to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to support coral reefs in Montreal and implement them to save coral reefs. This call to action I forgot to switch slides, I'm sorry. As a recap and a pop quiz, here, I think. So in a pop quiz, don't worry, here are our 5 key actions. This call to action can be found in more detail on our website, wcs.org/oceanaction, as well as by following this QR code. We ask all of you to share this call to action with your governments and with your partners, and please join us in urging governments to act now for coral reefs and coastal communities through climate adaptation. Thank you very much. Okay, so it is now my great honor to invite you to please join us in this discussion. We're at about 5:20 right now. Our next event, which is also focused on coral reefs, starts at 6 p.m. And in great news, I believe food and beverages should be arriving within the next 15 to 20 minutes. So you're stuck with us. And I would love to invite our panel maybe back up to the middle. If you wouldn't mind, Mayor, thank you. So I'd love to kick off our panel with a few questions and then invite questions from you in the audience and really try to host as much of an interactive discussion as possible given some of the chaos going on around us. But first, I'd really love to hear from you all as experts. What does success look like? So in this arena of raising coral reefs to the climate adaptation agenda, what would success look like? And
I'll get the ball rolling. I think success varies, to be honest. It all depends on why you're doing the work. So we may be doing coral reef protection, we may be doing restoration, but the reason why we're doing it is different. However, having said that, for the Nature Conservancy, we are trying to maintain ecosystems and the ecosystem services that they provide. This is things like fisheries support or fisheries production, coastal protection, reduction of wave attenuation. We're also looking at things like in the Caribbean, tourism is closely tied to coral reefs, right? Between people coming for snorkeling, diving, shark diving, beaches, which mostly are coming from sand produced off of our coral reefs, etc. This is another type of ecosystem services the reefs have. So we are looking to maintain a certain level of servicing. So we want healthy ecosystems, healthy oceans, but we're also looking to continue to yield certain level of benefits and economic resilience and reliance from the communities for us. So that's what success looks like at one level. At another level, for us, success really is if we can find a way to tie the sustainability and health of reefs to the health and economic well-being of the surrounding communities, so that in their everyday life, for them to live and thrive and be able to take care of themselves, they actually do something that's positive rather than negative in terms of our ecosystem. That's also a marker of success. So we're exploring in the Bahamas and a few other places in the region right now, like, is there a way to incentivize, develop, and support reef positive businesses for local communities, so that the business model in itself is positive and doing something positive for reefs, but it's also supporting the economic well-being of the community.
Thank you.
Well, success for me is for our people to have to have enough food to eat. Like we had been doing that 26 years ago, and we continuously doing it until now. And we will not stop doing it until we see our oceans with a balanced ecosystem, when our fishers have enough fish to catch and we have enough food to eat. For me, that's far more important, because when everybody works together, when everybody join together, everything will be in place. And for me also, success is when we already have enough mayors joining Coastal 500, and we already have a voice in this platform like COP, and for our national government to listen to us, because we know what is best for our communities and our people.
So yes to everything Shanique and Mayor Te said, but I think the other thing that I really hope to see within my lifetime is really a little bit of scale. There, even just in the Philippines alone, there's 800 coastal municipalities like Mayor Tess, right? So there's a lot of work to be done, and we need to be able to get better at doing it at larger networks. So we've been working with provinces and really clustering municipalities like Mayor Tess, and really trying to see whether we can direct both the political will from above and financing as well, to make sure that this happens faster and more widespread.
Absolutely. And I'd add as well that, in our theory of change, I think we all share our vision is that by putting all these pieces in place so that there's equity and inclusion and voice and participation and better social outcomes, that this has to lead to performance on the reefs as well. So to me, as a coral reef scientist, this means coral cover, the backbone architects of coral reefs, that is sustained and stabilized or increased. And then also for reef fish, which have that critical connection to communities, then we measure that through reef fish biomass. And that reef fish biomass is stabilized or also increased. And I think by looking at those two performance measures, you can say our approach is working. I think we've seen such exciting ambitions, for example, with the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. And a critical question is, how does blended finance work? And what is the link from reef positive businesses back onto the reef? And that's why we're at such an exciting junction in all of these agendas across climate and finance and social and environment, to really see what is working and how do we shift our trajectories as needed.
And one thing I wanted to add is, all these gestures like adaptation, mitigation, and all, is for us not expensive. While our national government say, oh, we need a lot of money. We need millions of pesos, millions of dollars. But for us, small communities, I would always emphasize that if we were able to do that 26 years ago, when we don't have enough money, when my community is very small, self-sustaining, how come we cannot do it now, where everybody's already getting involved? So I think for me, it's easier, it's not expensive, and if everybody works, it's I think it's clear for everyone that if we all work together, our work will be as easy. Our future is really guaranteed for our people.
So I'd like to elect Mayor Tay to the head of the UNFCCC right now. Thank you very much. All in favor?
That's just in accordance with my level. I don't know for the rest, but for me, that's how I feel and I see it.
Well, next I'd love to turn it over into the audience and carrying on this theme of success. 2 questions. One is hard and one is visionary, so you can pick which one you want. Where are the success stories? Have we come across success stories where local leaders, NGOs, national governments are best supporting coastal communities in climate adaptation? So question 1, where are the success stories, and can you tell us about them? And then number 2 is if it's, if this is put us all on the spot, it is hard and this is a future ambition, then where should we look for success? What are some of the enabling conditions that we will need to put into place for the success to happen? Over to you.
Hello. Well, I had a question prepared, but I guess I'll answer that question.
And please introduce yourselves
Of course.
to everyone.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Peduto. I'm from the United States, and as you might be able to tell by the pants, very passionate about coral. So I would say that a success story that I've seen is in the Buleleng Regency in northern Bali, in Indonesia, in the Indonesian archipelago. And what they did and what the government of Bali did was during the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, 90% of the Balinese islands depend on tourism for their income. And so it really, really affected the Balinese people. And so the local government actually started the Indonesian Coral Reef Garden in various parts of the island, but specifically in that Buleleng Regency where I'm interested in working. They actually used all of the divers and the dive masters from tourism operations to actually engage in coral planting, coral cultivation. And so it was a hugely successful coral restoration project that actually provided, economic stimulus to these dive masters that were out of work, while also restoring the ecosystem and, of course, preserving the ecosystem so that they can continue to attract people to dive in the beautiful waters surrounding that island in the future. So I think really something that has been echoed in many panels across COP, specifically related to coral as well in the restoring coastal ecosystems, is that this change in this future is going to be really, really dependent on engaging local actors. There's no simple solution that can come from a 30,000-foot view from governments. As much as we like to, leverage those funds are meaningless without actions and without investment and without input from local communities, because ultimately this is their home. This is where, they are existing. They've been stewards of this land forever. And so really engaging local populations with this work is essential, because without that, there's really not going to be any success otherwise.
Thank you so much for that call to action, which I think all of us really take to heart.
Hello, I am Lina Torres. I come from an organization called Movilizatorio in Colombia. And the success story I'm going to tell you is from supporting the program that we're launching to develop a network of indigenous and local communities and small-scale fisheries. So this is based on a model of the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities. I see that they are on a meeting right now. There is the largest delegation of indigenous and local communities attending COP. And we have been working with them over 6 years in providing the structure that they need to come to these places and advocate for themselves and be representatives of their voices. How cool would it be to not only have their videos, but also have them here telling their own stories. So that's what we're trying to do with small-scale fisheries as well, to support them to create a global advocacy network so that when they don't have the privilege of living with in countries and places with such majors like the ones that you heard, they are also capable of advocating for the changes they need to see and have a strong voice in international spaces. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for letting us contribute like this. My name's Orion McCarthy, and I'm a coral reef scientist at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I do a lot of my research in Maui in the United States. And one really good success story there is a fisheries management area that targets specifically herbivorous fish on a coral reef. And it's set up around a coral reef that faces a lot of nutrient pollution. So protecting the herbivorous fish there can help to offset some of the pollution from a wastewater treatment plant and help to sort of allow people to still fish but still protect the reef. And since that area was established in 2014, we saw a lot of increase in fish populations. And so that was a really good success story and had a lot of community engagement with helping to patrol the area and ensure enforcement. But COVID actually had a negative impact on both. The lockdown from COVID had a lot of the community enforcement was reduced, and people, because of the economic situation, were more desperate, and poaching increased. So I guess to get to your question about the enabling conditions, really having a healthy economic situation for local communities is really essential to having these protected areas be effective in achieving what they're set out to achieve.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Teicher from Coral Vita. Just want to first say this is an amazing panel with people I've worked alongside, people I've just met, organizations I've respected for a very long time, and new friends who I've gotten to snorkel with. And everyone definitely should take the opportunity, if they haven't yet, to get out onto the coral reefs here in the Red Sea. As far as a success story, I wanted to shout out a community-led effort on the island where I live in Grand Bahama, doing mangrove restoration. And I'm going to call out Karen right here because she's at the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund, which helped fund this program. And so I'm sure we all know the value of mangroves, from blue carbon to fisheries to shoreline protection. And a few years ago in Grand Bahama, we got hit by Hurricane Dorian, which was the strongest storm in recorded history to hit the Bahamas. Having been there, don't advise staying for a Cat 5. But mangroves actually save people's lives. In some communities, it literally gave them the opportunity in Sweeting Ski to get to higher ground, to get to their neighbors' houses. And in some communities where those mangroves have been cut down over the years, a lot of people lost their lives. Those mangroves saved lives, but they also put their lives on the line. And in Abaco, they lost 40% of the island's mangroves, in Grand Bahama, 70%. And so a group of community leaders, NGOs like Waterkeepers Bahamas, Earth Care, Blue Action Lab, started a community-led mangrove restoration project. And they had the goal of planting 30,000 mangroves, or collecting and then planting 30,000 mangroves. And there was a concern that they were going to actually have to buy a lot of mangroves from Florida just because there wasn't enough, given the damages, to do it. And by creating this competition called Mangrove Mania, working with students, getting the First Lady of the Bahamas involved, creating an app, they had teams formed, and they managed to collect 33,000 mangroves, and they were all Bahamian mangroves. And they're actually we're going to start planting this weekend, but there was a hurricane that hit our island, which fortunately was not so bad. But now there's talks of getting taxi drivers trained into bringing tourists to these nurseries to get tourists involved in it and really growing something off of it. So it's really an amazing community-led effort that's making a huge difference on the island.
Good afternoon. I hope you don't mind if I don't stand. I just wanted to add to what Sam had mentioned, that not only did we get the engagement of communities, but we got the engagement of a number of NGOs working in that space and coordinating that, including what was being led by Shanique before, of course, she became the Caribbean director, but the Nature Conservancy, Coral Vita, and Blue Action, and so many different organizations together because of the importance of mangroves for the Bahamas. As Sam said, we are in the hurricane belt. And so every hurricane, when I was leaving on Tuesday, a hurricane was coming by. I was kind of torn, like, should I go? Should I stay? What should I do? But eventually I said, we need to go, because we need to get the story out about the importance of mangroves, corals, seagrasses, and other things for coastal defense. So we are seeing a lot more now of just NGOs working together, working more strategically, and certainly our communities involved, which has not happened to the level that it has happened with that mangroves project in the past. So that's really a great success.
Hi, sorry. Hi, I'm Amin K. Sidhu. I'm an independent contractor, and actually this is not sharing an example, but a shameless ask for those that have actually shared their case studies. So I formerly worked with the Stanford Center of Ocean Solutions, and with Systemic, we are getting some funding from the Center of Environment, Fisheries, and Aquaculture, pardon me, in the UK, and we'd love to look at different case studies of aquaculture, coral reefs, and do kind of an analysis on positive tipping points. So it would be great to connect with some of you, maybe not in depth right now, but at least gather some information and be in touch after this. Thank you.
Wow, thank you all so much. It is so humbling, I think, from all of us up here to hear these success stories and to hear about aggregator initiatives. I think that's really how it goes to scale, is sharing success, sharing hope, and fighting back against the doom and gloom, because otherwise what are we all doing here? So we've got time for a few more questions. Are there any so panel, ask them. Okay, all right. The panel says we should ask you if you have questions. So, over to you. Any questions that you have? Sam, you already talked. Anyone else? But we will go to Sam. Going once. All right, Sam. We always love hearing from you.
I was just curious if each one of you could maybe share one of the more surprising moments or lessons from working with local communities that you think is really, really positive and then you want other people to learn about?
I have one. We always get asked the question of what's it like when communities have to wait for the recovery of the resource, right? It's really about the time when they actually have to suffer while waiting for recovery. The interesting thing that we find is that the process of participating, of really kind of like being given the chance to make their own decisions and call the shots about where protected areas need to be, what kinds of rules and regulations they're going to implement, already is a huge value. To me, that's kind of like their first intermediate benefit. And even before we see the uptick in the ecological results of coral cover and fish biomass, they're already saying our fish are increasing, we're catching more. So it's perception, but it does come first. And that helps them wait it out until they get to the point where the recovery actually happens.
And probably to add up with Rocky's story, in my town, during off-season, when the fishers cannot fish, right? And the wives has, other alternative what I was doing, we created a Fish Forever Savings Club, where in one group there are 25. They have to save at least 50 pesos for one fish, one share, a maximum of 5 shares for each member. I cannot imagine that for the last, we started 2016. 6 years from one group to 62 groups times 25. They were able to save $500,000. My town is very small, 5th class. But I can't imagine, because the very intention of that savings club is, during off-season when they don't have money, they can borrow. They have social fund when when there's an emergency from the family. They get to get that fund and then use it for their hospital bills or whatever. But there's a lot of testimonies coming from the people how this savings club has really made a significant change in their lives. So you just don't think of, or things are not as easy, or it's when you do change and when we protect our environment, it's not just good for 1 year, right? 2 years, 5 years. It's a long process. But during those times when people has limitations to fish because we have often close and open season, we have this savings club that save them on their basic needs of the family. So for me, it matters a lot.
Sam, thanks for your question. I guess I'll share a story from the Bahamas. I'm kind of torn, but I'll go to the Bahamas for this one. We have been doing work in the Bahamas for many years on protected areas, and as often is the case, it's a controversial issue, often met with a lot of resistance from fishermen. And a few years ago, we went to an island in the Bahamas called Long Island, which is a huge fishing community. They fish, one of the biggest fish they capture is Nassau grouper, which is a spawning fish, right? And we were proposing protection of a few spawning aggregations around their community, which was riotous, right? So we were in a stakeholder community, a stakeholder consultation, and you have like different segments of fishers that are actually on opposing views. Some of them were for the protected area, some not, and we saw a clear distinction between bonefish guides, which are catch and release fishers, versus persons who were doing like the reef fisheries, right? But it was so contentious, like eventually the police had to be called into this meeting. So I'm just giving you background, like the context of how controversial and how challenging it was working in this community. And after that meeting, a few fishers came to us and asked us to have breakfast the following day. They wanted to have a conversation, right? And they wanted to have breakfast to kind of give us advice and guidance on what's the best way to navigate the community. But I think that's surprising, but surprising in a positive way. And coming out of that, even though we were talking about protected areas, they raised two other issues, which was the need for mangrove restoration following a Hurricane Joaquin, because this was shortly after Hurricane Joaquin had hit the Bahamas, in particular Long Island was the most affected area, and had done a lot of sediment moving and had affected the hydrology of some areas in the mangrove ecosystem. But they also had brought up the issue of, we also have a spiny lobster fishery in the Bahamas that uses a gear called condos, a spiny lobster condos, which is like, we say a little mini lobster house or condominium, but this issue of ghost traps. And the fact that after storms, so many goat traps are lost and not recovered, and the damage that this does to reefs when these traps are knocking around. So this fisher also wanted to speak to us about what he perceived was an issue too that was not getting enough airtime and being addressed. So what it shows you is that even in the most contentious of situations, you will always have persons who can see why there's a need, and they do want to do something in their own way once you allow them to have that voice and that opportunity. So I think that's encouraging.
So always go to breakfast when you're invited by fishermen is the take-home story there. I know I certainly do. That's such a great question, Sam, about success and what stands out in working across communities and coral reefs. I think for me, I'm thinking about Ovalau Island, also back in Fiji in 2019. We were there invited by communities to survey coral reefs as part of an island-wide management plan. But early that morning, as we were getting our tanks and our gear together, we were pulled aside by when we were all sitting around for breakfast, pulled aside and said, a few years ago, Cyclone Winston had come through that island, which was the eye of the storm, and they had lost crops, they had lost access to clean water, several people had died. And so to get through that cyclone 3 years ago, they had opened up their tambu, so that closed area of reef. Instead of just opening it up for 1 day for the school fees like on Coral Island, they opened it up entirely and said, this is the way that our people will survive, that our community will have something to eat. So at breakfast 3 years later, they said, we've kept it open for 3 years, but should we close it? Because we know there's going to be more storms coming, and we know that we'll need to rebuild these fisheries so that they're able to provide for us next time. And so we were asked, when you're out there, can you let us know what you think? So we went out and did our dives, and we're collecting data underwater on our transect lines and our slates and recording the size and species of fish, the types of corals. And we come back to the village that afternoon, and one of the platforms we've been advancing at WCS and with partners, World Wildlife Fund, Spark Geo, and I know some of us up here are using it too, is called Mermaid. And so it's a marine ecological research management aid. It's a web app that works offline when we're in these remote conditions. And so that afternoon, we quickly typed in our data into the app, into Mermaid, and got the answer, which was yes. They did, the fish biomass levels were lower than some critical thresholds. They're at about 300 kilograms per hectare. And we usually think of something about 500 kilograms per hectare as being sustainable. But coral cover was still really high. Coming out of Mermaid, it was about 65, 70% coral cover. So the conditions were really healthy to be able to rebuild these fisheries, but the continued pressure from opening up the Tambu had driven the fish biomass down. And so normally we wouldn't have been able to get those numbers so fast. The Excel sheets and the wet data sheets would have had to be dried off, taken back to Suva, entered into Excel files, painfully cleaning up Excel files, and we would have had to say to the village, we'll get back to you in a couple months. That's a great question. But because of Mermaid, what we were able to do was that night around the kava bowl say, you're right, your fish communities are below these key thresholds. Here's by how much, and you're what do you think that you want to do about it? And so that night they decided to work with the community to set up a plan to close the Tambu so that it could recover for the next cyclone, and invited us back, to continue to look at that recovery. So I think a couple take-homes for me are meet people where they are, not just in place in terms of spending time in local communities, but meet them with what communities want. And I think that's been so powerful to me in my career. And don't be afraid of data. I think stories are critical, but people also want numbers. They want information, and breaking that down as much as possible can really spark changes in local policies like we saw here. All right, and so with that, we've got 10 minutes, and I think everyone else is stealing our cocktail hour. So I suggest that we wrap. And but before we do that, I mean, sharing is caring, as we all know. But I wanted to invite you to stay on for, in 10 minutes, we'll be kicking off another Coral Reef panel hosted by Rocky, and I think featuring a number of us in the room. And I know Bloomberg Philanthropies and a number of us would welcome you to stay. So thank you so much. We look forward to continue to talking. And any final words from our esteemed panel?
Thank you for the opportunity of being here. And I think you've said a lot, but I go back to my point from my presentation, which is we do want to engage communities in an authentic way and empower them to be the leaders of the change that needs to happen if we're going to be successful with restoring reefs and climate adaptation.
In what we're doing, we're not alone. We have partners from the national government, local government units, NGOs, NGAs, academia. We still need more partners. We still need you for us to be able to achieve our intentions for the future. Thank you.
And that's the perfect segue because the topic at 6 o'clock is partnerships. So, all right. So, but enjoy your drinks and cocktails before we start that one.